the stethoscopes to her and then looked around, looked at each other rather dumbfounded and seemed surprised that she was not dead. And she was given more electricity, which started again that kind of a ghastly plume of smoke that rose from her head and went up against the skylight overhead. After two more of those jolts, Ethel Rosenberg had met a maker she'll have a lot of explaining to do, too. Thank you.
McCarthy now denounced leading Republicans and even senior army officers as communist sympathizers. But he had gone too far. Political opinion swung away from him, and his enemies gained courage.
Give the names of communists. You say to the army.
You've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
It all sort of came to pieces. And then there was this move to censure him, and he fought that very badly. Now, a number of us were advising him on how to handle that, and he agreed to everything we said, and then he did just the opposite.
You have been here trying to snare the staff of this committee. The young men who have been working to uncover communists, you jump up and run away without answering the question.
McCarthy's power collapsed as the politicians walked away from him. But the spirit of McCarthyism, the smearing of dissent as communist treason, stained American democracy for decades. In the Soviet Union, all dissent was suppressed. The Cold War heightened tensions and reinforced fears, not just of internal subversion, but of another world war. Obsessively, Stalin spoke of the danger to world peace, the need for vigilance against internal enemies. Conformity was enforced by police terror and by a slavish cult of Stalin's personality. He became godlike, his icon worshipped everywhere. For those who did not conform, there was silence and death behind the barbed wire. The Gulag, the secret empire of concentration camps, stretched over 4,000 miles from the Baltic to the Pacific. In the Cold War years, the camps continued to devour the lives of millions. Stalin's control now extended beyond the Soviet Union. This was a new empire, run by local communists, trained to obey Moscow. American propaganda targeted the fate of these satellite nations.
The battleground of peace today is that strip of strategically located countries stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. They are not big countries geographically, but they contain 70 million freedom-loving people, our kind of people, who share our culture and who have sent millions of their sons and daughters to become part of these United States. Some call these countries the satellite nations. More accurately, they are the captive nations of Europe.
My name is Ronald Reagan. Last year, the contributions of 16 million Americans to the crusade for freedom made possible the World Freedom Bell, symbol of hope and freedom to the communist-dominated peoples of Eastern Europe.
In Western Berlin, great crowds turned out to see it raised to the tower of the West Berlin City Hall.
The campaign was secretly funded by the CIA. As well as fine words, Americans sent armed exiles back into the Soviet Empire.
This was the effort of the CIA, and the young refugees were recruited. They were trained in haste in all kinds of subversion, sabotage, intelligence. They were given cameras, the short radio stations, codes, and were simply sent there. But the regime did penetrate all these training camps, and the reception committee was waiting for these people and arresting them.
Zbierane, żądane przez wywiad amerykański, jak zdjęcia, dokonywane obiektów przemysłowych, mostów, torów kolejowych.
Niechaj tę prawdę
For the Polish authorities, these intrusions justified even harsher repression. The party called for vigilance against spies and saboteurs. In 1948, Stalin began to tighten the Soviet grip on Eastern Europe. In Yugoslavia, Marshal Tito had defied Stalin and broken away from the Soviet bloc. Moscow abused him as a traitor, a deserter to the camp of American imperialism. Stalin moved fast to prevent Tito's mutiny spreading to other satellite states, like Czechoslovakia. At first, the satellites were allowed to find their own paths to communism. Now, Stalin forced the Soviet model on them all. Everyone must march, shout, obey.
Ojcze sowieckich narodów a mirowe fronty celého świata, wielki Stalin.
To subdue protest, Moscow ordered show trials of leading East European communists. In Czechoslovakia, Rudolf Slansky, party secretary, was among those chosen for sacrifice.
Stalin needed to discipline his new camp, his new empire. And he disciplined it to such an extent that people living in those countries should not develop any idea of being able to do anything except what he orders them to do. And one of the methods of disciplining it was terror.
Slansky was charged with Titoism, spying, and sabotage. His confession was fiction, drafted by Soviet advisors.
To tedy znamená, že na začátku své politické činnosti před orgány buržázní moci jste si vedl jako oportunista a zbabělec a ne jako komunista. Je to.
Готовились предварительные следственные заключения.
The initial investigation results were prepared and checked. If the evidence in these cases didn't meet the aims of the security services, then it was altered. Really, it was a fabrication to prove what otherwise couldn't be proved.
Jaký to řetěz otřásajících zločinů. Avšak přes rafinované spiklenství a záškodnictví, přes lstivou obojetnost a hanebnost svých prostředků nedosáhli svých cílů. Byli rozdrceni.
The key was the confession of the indicted person. And then there was no need of any proofs. As soon as the confession was obtained, that was enough for the trial and the sentence. So we were put at the disposal of the secret police with almost unlimited powers over us, to bring us into a state where we were prepared to make that confession.
To bylo týrání.
It was torture.
Kde na mě oni řvali a nadávali. A musela jsem
They were shouting and swearing at me.
A já jsem z toho
I had to look into their eyes.
utekla tím.
At the beginning, I avoided this, but then I had to repeat their obscenities.
Hovno prdel, hovno prdel. A potom jsem si začala vymýšlet pohádky pro své.
Then I started to make up fairy tales for my son.
Na Královský hrad.
I got into an imaginary world of castles and princes and animals. So when they shouted at me, I didn't have to answer them.
Oni na mě řvali. Já jsem jim nemusela odpovědět.
I only looked into their eyes while I was making up these fairy tales.
Já jsem se jim dívala do očí a vymýšlela jsem tyto pohádky. A ty jsou napsané. No.